The Texas church shooting, Democrats win big, and Donna Brazile's new book. I'm Simon Harrington, and this is The Square Circle. Hello, and welcome to The Square Circle. I'm your host, Simon Harrington. Joining us today are Ebonique Ellis of Good Management Investments, Lisalyn Jacobs of Just Solutions, and Kelly Vlahos of the American Conservative. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome.
Right. Another mass shooting occurred over the weekend, this time at a small church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Devin Kelley killed 26 people and injured dozens more. He himself was killed, and it's unclear what his motives were. Ebonique Ellis, we seem to be going around in circles with this conversation. What is the solution to these mass murders, and more importantly, or just in general, gun violence in general?
Well, for me, in this particular instance, as a wife of a veteran, I felt like he needed, first I feel sorry for all of the victims of the shooting, and I just wanted to say that. But for the perpetrator, he needed more support for veterans. We need more mental health support for veterans. We need more support for military families, because so often we see that military families are not given the proper solutions to get back into civilian life. And we see this in this instance, and we see this so often. So I'm hopeful that Trump will, support military veterans in a way that he says that he might.
Okay, and Kelly Vlahos, what would you like to say about the gun situation, and how can we stop this?
Well, I think this underscores a major issue. We often, after these terrible events, there's an increased talk about gun control and new legislation to rectify the gun violence in our society. But in this case, I think it really underscores the issues of how existing laws don't work, or they're not properly maintained, or they're not working the way they're supposed to. In this case, the Air Force, somehow the word didn't get out, or it wasn't implemented, that this perpetrator had, committed an assault. He was discharged from the military, but yet he was able to purchase a gun in civilian life. What are the disconnects between the laws in the military and the laws in civilian life, and how does one hand talk to the other, or however you say it? I feel like we have laws on the books that are either not enforced, or they're not enforced effectively, and this is just one of those cases where the bureaucracy is huge, and all of the presets are there, but yet this man fell through the cracks and was able to purchase a gun with a mental health history. So I think that we can look, more carefully at how these laws are being implemented.
Lisalyn, what would you say? Do you think that if these rules were enforced, if the laws that are already on the books were enforced, do you think that would be a solution?
I think it is a solution. I, for one, want to say that I think we do know what is at the root of this crime. The perpetrator was a domestic violence perpetrator. He had a history. He had fractured his stepson's skull. This was someone who went to that particular church because his mother-in-law attended it. That was why he picked it. So there were certainly mental health concerns, and those should be attended to. And I have to say I'm troubled because earlier this year, President Trump loosened the restrictions that were in place about sales of guns to people who have mental health challenges. But I think Kelly was headed in the right direction with this, right? The armed services knew. Clearly, they had court-martialed him. He had served time. They should have notified the FBI that this was a perpetrator who should not have been allowed to purchase a gun. And yet that didn't happen. But I think particularly we see repeatedly, we saw it in Las Vegas, that at least people who encountered that perpetrator previously in the Starbucks said he was abusive, right? We need to pay particular attention to particular types of victims, by which I mean victims of domestic violence, because so frequently their perpetrators escalate. They engage in this kind of senseless, blanket homicidal violence that envelops not only their immediate victims, but other people who happen to be in the same place when the perpetrator escalates to we refer to it, I do domestic and sexual violence advocacy. Sure. When they reach lethality, right, it's really a question of who has the unfortunate, who's the unfortunate person who's in the universe at that point. So the target, I believe, was his mother-in-law. But yes, we need to do much more than we are doing. I think the Armed Services has acknowledged some culpability, but in general, there needs to be much more work around making sure that those kinds of reports go into the databases so that perpetrators are not allowed to have those kinds of weapons.
It doesn't seem to me that this is always the case, though. The Newtown, Connecticut, I don't know if there was mental illness there. I mean, obviously, at some point that we've got mental illness there, but it doesn't seem to me that this is always the case. And to me, enforcing these laws doesn't always seem that might not be the solution. It seems to be,
well, I think there's a couple of things, right? In Newtown,
it seems to me that we need to take further steps.
Sure. In Newtown, as I recall, we are talking about a much younger perpetrator, but he did have some history of psychiatric challenges. But I think the other piece that we are talking about is the kind of hardware, in this case, the AR-15, that is frequently at issue in these kinds of homicides, right?
AR-15 tells what that is.
That's a particular type of weapon. That's a weapon that can be changed to semi-automatic, right? So that it fires off multiple hundreds of rounds in minutes, et cetera. And so
that was that the one that they used in Vegas?
Yes, but also in Texas.
Okay. I believe that conversation has already been dropped, from what I understand. People were saying.
Oh, that was the bump stock.
The bump stock.
Yeah, I believe that the NRA lobby had leaned on their Republican legislators so hard that that particular proposal seems to be dead in the water at this point, which is unfortunate. At least a debate should have been at hand, but it wasn't. So
once upon a time, we had an assault weapons ban in this country because it's not clear to me why a law-abiding U.S. citizen needs that much firepower.
It just scares me to think of a government who's able to have that firepower and me as an individual not being able to have it, with all the police brutality reports you hear. Sure. And you might be scared of the administration. I want to be able to bear arms, I want to have the right to bear the same arms that any military soldier is able to have. And so I want that. Why do you need
that? That's why we have an armed services, right?
I know, but you can't trust them at all time. That's what the Second Amendment is about. It's about me being able to be, at any point, if my government is going overboard, if doing something that I don't think is right, they know that I, as a private citizen, have the same tools as they do.
I think the Second Amendment has actually not been read to encompass semi-automatic rifles for private citizens. Certainly, the military has the right to bear that caliber of hardware, but no private citizen needs to have access to that kind of hardware. I am uncertain how many times this needs to happen. Okay, the people at Newtown, the people in Texas, the people in Las Vegas, they need more than thoughts and prayers. They need legislators who are not in the pockets of the NRA, who will stand up and make sure that we are safer by getting that kind of hardware out of the hands of private citizens, particularly when, as we've just been discussing, right, we have databases that aren't being updated, right, so that perpetrators who shouldn't have access are getting access to exactly this kind of hardware. No one needs it.
I'm going to give Ebonique one last word on this, or should we move on?
I'll let you move on.
Okay. All right, I'd like to remind our viewers that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net, or via Facebook or Twitter, and we'll answer as many as we can live on air toward the end of the show. Tuesday turned out to be a big day for the Democratic Party as they won victories around the country, including governorships in Virginia and New Jersey. Lisalyn Jacobs, was this a big victory for the Democratic Party as, a referendum on Trump, or was it just states going the way that these states are supposed to go, Virginia and New Jersey particularly being Democratic states?
Well, I think the exit polling shows that it was at least a referendum on Trump. Lots of people who were asked, who were leaving the polls, who were asked why they voted, were voting particularly because they are concerned about the policies of this particular administration. Virginia has an off year, we call it, election, right? Doesn't run with the general election. So the idea that people came out in the numbers that they did, and it should be said, millennials and single women and people of color, particularly women of color, who carried the day. And some of those groups, particularly people of color, I think, feel particularly besieged or challenged by this administration. And so I think they wanted to come out and ensure that they voted in line with their values and concerns. Chief among them, I would say, healthcare, the economy, and education were the big three.
And Kelly Vlahos, how do you see Tuesday's results?
Well, I think there's two things we're looking at here. On the positive side for Democrats, I mean, it was all about turnout. The anti-Trump inspiration really worked among Democrats. They were able to turn their people out, and you see this in a wave of election of Democrats for the House of Delegates in Virginia, for example. I mean, I think the jury is out. I don't think all the numbers are in yet, but they might take the House back, which is incredible for Democrats. That all said, there were different dynamics here that bode well for Democrats to begin with. Chris Christie in New Jersey was very unpopular, so it was basically the Democrats' election or race to lose in that case. And in Virginia had been trending blue since Obama. They voted for him twice, and they voted for Hillary. I think people forget that Trump did better than expected in Virginia, but Hillary won Virginia. So those conditions were already there. Democrats are able to pull their numbers, but they didn't, according to what we're seeing now in the exit polls, they didn't bring in new voters. They didn't expand their base any. Just liberals came out. I think liberals, there were 28%. The electorate were liberals. They were 20% in 2013. So that's showing that they just got their numbers out. But they got a lot of work to do if they want to get the white non-college voters who voted for Trump throughout the rest of Virginia. So they still have work to do, but it was a good night for them.
And Ebonique, how do you feel about the results on Tuesday night? What do you see for the future of Virginia and New Jersey and everywhere else?
I definitely felt like it was the year of the woman, especially for the Democratic Party. They were able to, get a lot of women women into office, and I thought that was amazing. And I felt like there was a lot of work to do on the Republican side to reframe the issues for women. And then I also thought it was interesting what the women did, not only and women and gay people, LGBTQ community. We had a transgender win in Virginia. Yeah. And I love that it was based on the issues, not based on, he wasn't trying to bring some partisan thing. It was Virginia, traffic's horrible. We all talked about that earlier today, yes, personally. Right. The traffic is awful. And he was on point, or she was on point with the issue of traffic. And then her opponent was just trying to talk about the bathroom ban. And so I love that it was about issues first. And I hope that the GOP gets their act together and puts together issues that voters care about, and we'll see in the future.
Okay. I think there's a certain poetic justice in Danica Rome defeating the person who championed the LGBT bathroom ban, however. But you make a good point, Ebony. I think that in many ways it was the year of the woman. One of the really interesting things I read suggested that the energy that so many women brought to their races was actually what energized people to come out. So instead of it being Northam pulling the down ballot actually pushed Northam, is the suggestion. But, I think Northam actually, did well. His numbers, I think, his numbers were at least as good, I think, as Clinton's in terms of getting the vote out.
He was better with women than Hillary Clinton, so I love that. Right. Women don't vote for just another woman. We vote based on issues. And we saw that with this election, and I I'm proud of all of us, women at the table.
He was better with women of color and single women.
Yes.
White women and white men still went overwhelmingly at least 50% and above for Gillespie.
And Kelly Vlahos, did you want to add to
Yeah,
this?
and I think that the healthcare issue can't be denied here.
Absolutely.
I mean, over the last year, we have watched Virginians, particularly in our rural, poorer areas, are suffering because the Republicans in Virginia have stymied Medicaid infusion in this state, the federal Medicaid subsidies. So we have newspaper stories about rural Virginians having to go to medical tents that are set up periodically in their town just to get basic care, even diabetes medicine. And I think over time, when you see Washington can't get their act together on the whole Obamacare issue, people are suffering. I think Terry McAuliffe was right. I mean, he was going up against a hard wall of Republicans who would not give him that Medicaid. And I think the people reacted at the polls because of that strongly.
All right, well, we need to move on with that. All right, and finally, former Democratic National Committee Chair Donna Brazile made some explosive allegations in her new book. Here's Fox News' coverage.
In an excerpt from her new book called Hacks, which will soon come out, Brazile writes, "I had promised Bernie when I took the helm of the Democratic National Committee after the convention that I would get to the bottom of whether Hillary Clinton's team had rigged the nomination process," which a lot of people had suspected at the time. As Hillary's campaign gained momentum, she resolved the party's debt. It had become dependent on her campaign for survival. By September 7th, the day I called Bernie, I had found my proof, and it broke my heart.
And Kelly Vlahos, was this Donna Brazile story a sign of the Democratic Party starting to fray, or was this just infighting between friends?
Well, I think the party has been fraying. And I think for the last several months, the Democrats have been doing their best to sort of distract their base and the American people at large about why Hillary lost. And we've been talking for months now about Russian collusion with Trump, Russian meddling, the hacking, the Facebook, the Twitter. Hillary came out with her book. She talked about all the reasons why she didn't win, but the blame was never put inward. And I think from the start, from the primaries on, there's been an undercurrent of division within the party that's hinted at the rigging of the Democratic primary in favor of Hillary at the expense of Bernie Sanders, who had built a very strong base of support. And that's never gone away. You know, his supporters are still out there. But I think what Donna Brazile did was just blow the lid off of that story in terms of coming forward. She's credible. She's a longtime Democratic activist and operative. And for her to come forward and say that she saw firsthand collusion between the DNC and the Hillary campaign, which she says it was not illegal, but it was unethical, that basically she will not use the word rigged, but basically in our common parlance had rigged it in Hillary's favor. That plus all of the other issues with the Hillary campaign, the waste of the money, the fact they couldn't get things done to the point where she was thinking of replacing Hillary with Joe Biden.
Right.
I mean, this brings it all back to the divisions in the party and puts a lot of the responsibility for their losses on the party and not outward at Trump and Russians and all that other business.
Ebonique, you want to add to this?
I also loved it about the character that she described the Clinton campaign, that they lack that they were very insular and that they were rude and snotty to her and dismissive. I met Donna Brazile briefly, and she was just a warm, calm, lovely person, and I'd like more people like her on both sides of the aisle. But I thought it was ironic that when the Clinton campaign responded to what her comments were, they said something like, if you weren't in our campaign, don't respond about our campaign. If you're not with us, then you're against us. And it's exactly what Donna Brazile was claiming, is that they're an insular, cliquish sort of type of people. And as a veteran campaign person, I don't like being in campaigns that think paid people are better off than unpaid people. We want to start a movement, and we want to start a movement based on the issues of the American people, and every person should want to join your team regardless of whether they get paid or not. And I felt like the Clinton people, they definitely were people that were just money oriented. The people in their campaign were money oriented. They were status driven, and everyone felt that. Everyone in the American public felt that these people were status driven, money hungry people that are going to lose. And they did. So there it is.
Let's let Lisalyn respond.
Thank you. You know, I have to say, the dominant feeling I have about all of this is relief, right? Because when a story like this comes up immediately before the election, the real concern I have is what's the impact going to be on turnout, right? And the answer, fortunately, was 0, right? I mean, the DNC has a new chair now. Tom Perez was out barnstorming over the weekend, and he literally said, guess how many people asked me about Donna Brazile? 0, right? We are not in a general election year. I am not sure why we feel compelled to keep relitigating Hillary and, you know, trying to look into the tea leaves and deal with all of these issues, et cetera. I mean, Donna Brazile, God bless her, has had about 50 years in politics, right? Has an absolute right to speak her truth, to talk about all of these issues, but I was incredibly concerned about the timing, right? It did not bode well in terms of its impact.
Let her make her money.
Well, you know, I do not begrudge anybody the right to tell a story, but I just become concerned about ways in which, and all parties are guilty of this, right? You can devolve into infighting at moments which are not helpful, but I think that over the course of this year, right, Democrats have been really good about keeping their eye on the ball. And the eye that they wanted, the ball that they were focused on in this election was a referendum on this president, who has been troubling in so many respects that they wanted to see people who were progressive. They wanted to bring in women. We, you know, now have our first Sikh mayor in Hoboken, New Jersey, you know, just all across the country. Several other transgender legislators were elected. I think the Dems did a fabulous job at the end of the day of keeping their eye on the ball and making sure that this country gets back on track.
But I love that go ahead.
I
love that she was, that today our society is so partisan. And so I love that she was looking at herself and being critical in a time that was needed. It was needed for her. It would help her book sales. And so I'm glad she's making some money. But we need to look at ourselves and evaluate for ourselves so we're not so partisan. And so I like that she was just giving it up at the time that was appropriate. So I'm very thankful.
All right, and Kelly?
Well, I was just going to say, I think what the other ball in play here is who sets the narrative of the 2016 election. And I think at this moment, within the year after, different people are trying to give their story as to what happened. Now, Hillary got her chance, and I think Donna Brazile was and was fully right to come out and say her piece. Because if they don't learn from their mistakes, they might have done great in this particular election, but going forward, you know, like you said, they have to look in the mirror before they clean up their, you know, their messes. And I think by, you know, scapegoating Russia or whatever for the last several months is not done. They haven't done the proper autopsy or whatever you call it for their for moving forward.
All right. Okay, we'll leave it at that on this one. All right, let's take some questions from our viewers. Oh, let's see if we've got this. All right, on our first question, I will ask Lisalyn. It comes from Jody Quinn, and he would like to know, have the Democrats finally moved on from the Clintons? Just what we were talking about.
I think so, right? I mean, again, Donna Brazile has the right to talk about what she wants to talk about, but I think that with this slate of candidates, you know, the people that we saw out stumping for them were President Obama and others. I think we are moving forward. I think we have a proactive agenda, and I think that we're ready to move forward.
All right, and I'm going to take our next question is from George Carson, and he would like to know, we'll ask Kelly. All right, have we read too much into the election wins in 2017 by both Republicans and Democrats?
Well, as I was saying before, I think that some of their narratives have been a little bit overstated. I think particularly in Virginia, you had 5 statewide Democrats. We still have 5 statewide Democrats. On the other hand, like I said, delegates, that was big. And I don't think that you can overstate. If they turn the House of Delegates to Democrat, I think that is a big win, and I think that they should embrace it. But there's just, there's too many other dynamics going on here. We'll have to wait into 2018 to see how the
really
anti-Trump movement impacts elections.
All right. All right, and now it's time for our most underreported story of the week. Who would like to start? Somebody.
I'll start.
Okay, Kelly.
I know we had the leak of the Paradise Papers this week. An offshore bank had released thousands of documents detailing the Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross's offshore investments, and one of the companies was a Russian-linked company. And while the media has been sort of focused on the Russian and Kremlin connections of this company that Wilbur Ross has investments in, I think that we should also look at the fact that he has these offshore investments. I mean, we have something like $2.5 trillion of U.S. money is parked overseas right now. And I think back of the envelope, that's like, something like $50 billion in missing taxes. Not missing, but taxes that we could be using for infrastructure and other needs here in the United States. So I think we need to look more at what our billionaires in this country and how they're parking their money overseas and not paying taxes. And it's not illegal, but it is unethical, like we said, Donna Brazile used in describing things at the DNC. So I would like to see the press focus more on that and less on the sexier Russia angle.
Well, come on now. All right, and what would you like to report for your underreported story?
So I recently published something with the help of Young Voices Advocate in Counterpunch about there's a lot of talk about IT diversity, encouraging diversity in the IT field, but there's a little talk about how the actual computer programming languages are actually all English-based. And so that's an extra hindrance for people who are Latino, who are Hispanic, or who speak Chinese. They have to actually learn English to program. So I just recently published a story on that, and so please check out Counterpunch.
Sure, will do. And Lisa?
Great. So what I want to raise is what I think is the sleeper issue in the Harvey Weinstein and related issues. The New York Times has twice in the last 2 weeks said the same thing in the middle of a pair of articles, and it is this. Predators start young, right? Generally in college or in high school, right? So I think that they're doing a great job of focusing on what's going on in the workplace. But I think that if we really want to have a conversation about how to make this kind of preying on women, this kind of sexual violence stop, we've got to pull the camera back. We've got to talk about doing more on campuses. We've also got to talk about healthy relationships and talk about how you teach kids to say no, how you teach them about boundaries, how you teach them about things like consent. Because if you do the right things in middle school, in high school, and in college...
Probably earlier even, right?
Yes.
Probably even earlier.
Exactly. If you help people to establish those boundaries and understand what consent is, then you don't have to wait until you get to the workplace to solve the problem. And you come to understand that you won't be able to solve the problem in the workplace if the predation has been going and that behavior has been taking place for years in advance of that in many instances.
Okay, that's all for this week, and I'm Simon Harrington. Thanks for watching The Square Circle, and we'll see you next week.